At First Fruits of Zion, we're preparing to reprint Paul Philip Levertoff's classic book on Hasidic Judaism and the Gospel of John, Love and the Messianic Age. The message of Paul Philip Levertoff's Love and the Messianic Age is a message that the Messianic movement desperately needs. Far too much time has already been spent in the Hebrew Roots Torah movement and the Messianic Jewish movement, straining gnats and concentrating attention on externals. Arguments about the Torah, arguments about Jews and Gentiles, arguments about the calendar, arguments about halakha, arguments about tzitzit, arguments about Sabbath, about kashrut. From the outside, it must seem that Messianic Judaism is something of a parody of itself, where the great hechsher and the secret handshake boils down to whether you worship on Saturday or Sunday, whether you say Jesus or Yeshua, whether you keep Christmas or not, and whether or not you eat ham. I'm not saying that some of these things aren't important, but even the Talmud says that it's possible to be a scoundrel with the permission of Torah. Yeshua says it this way: you clean the outside of the cup, but not the inside. Levertoff's book is about the inside of the cup, the deep, mysterious, soul-level inside of the cup. It's a book about the deep mysticism of knowing God. In fact, the first chapter of the book is called Knowledge and Love, and it's about what it means to know God. In chapter 1, Levertoff writes, "There are two kinds of knowledge, it is said. On the one hand, there is knowledge of God, which anyone may acquire by studying creation and acquainting themselves with the character imprinted thereon. That is to say that by carefully observing the universe, a man can deduce a great deal about the Creator." This is what Paul was speaking of in the book of Romans when he said in the first chapter of Romans, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made." Simply observing a sunset, or exploring the laws of physics, or studying the sciences, or just musing about the nature of nature leads a person to ask the right kinds of questions and to make a few conclusions about the Creator. But at best, this is a very limited type of knowledge. Levertoff goes on to say that, on the other hand, there is the knowledge of the inner being of God. This latter is a progressive knowledge of God. It leads to love of Him, and love for Him brings as its final result the actual vision of Him. That is to say, through knowing God, the inner being of God, a person comes to intimately know and experience Him. In Hebrew idiom, knowledge suggests intimacy. So we could call this goal, this actual vision of God, we could call it intimate knowledge of Hashem. Of course, when Levertoff says that love for Him brings as its final result the actual vision of Him, he's not speaking in the literal sense. God's spirit, and we can't see Him. No man sees God and lives. But the closer we can draw to knowing Him intimately, to really knowing Him, it's as if we're glimpsing the King in His glory. Levertoff goes on to say that to attain this vision, the actual sight of God, is the highest aim. It is a consummation which will not be reached until the Messianic age. But it is the business of the Chassid to live now for the realization of this Messianic age. In other words, even though we won't know God face to face until the Messianic era, it is our privilege and responsibility today to know Him as deeply and intimately as possible in anticipation of the age to come. So let me recapitulate. Levertoff says there are two types of knowledge of God, two ways of knowing God. On the one hand, there's the objective study of creation in order to deduce something about the Creator, a sort of rational approach. And this rational, static means of knowing God isn't just about nature and creation, because to a certain extent, this kind of knowledge of God can be derived from theology, religion, and the Bible and so forth as well. It is real knowledge of God, but it isn't always personal knowledge. On the other hand, there is the intimate, the relational knowledge of God, which results in love for Him and, so to speak, the actual vision of Him. It's like the difference between knowing about the president from what you read about him and from seeing him on the television, from hearing his speeches, his State of the Union address and so on, and actually knowing the president personally, spending time with him, enjoying time with him, conversing together, sharing a meal together at the White House, and coming into fellowship and friendship with him. Those would be two completely different types of knowledge. Levertoff contrasts these two types of knowledge. He says, the two forms of knowledge, which we may call the static, that is the rational, and the dynamic, that is the mystic, productive of the Messianic age, are contrasted by means of illustrations. The picture is not the artist, nor is the voice of a singer the personality of the man. We may admire the artist because of the picture, the singer because of the voice, but we do not really know either man. Levertoff offers us an explanation of these two types of knowledge by means of two illustrations, that of a singer and that of a painter. Creation is like a picture painted by Hashem. It displays His power, His magnificence, and His attributes. However, there's a limit to how much we can learn about a painter from just staring at a painting that he created. Just as the picture is not the artist, Hashem utterly transcends His creation. In the same way, we may know the voice of a gifted singer without ever personally knowing the singer, because the voice itself is not the singer. The mystic wants more than knowledge about God. He wants to know God. He wants to know the artist who made the painting. He wants to know the singer who sang the song. The same principle can actually be applied to the Bible itself, because it's possible to be a brilliant Bible scholar knowing every detail of the Bible without actually knowing God. Knowledge of God is not just in the head. It has to be more than cerebral. Levertoff goes on to write, still in the first pages of chapter 1, he goes on to say, the essence of man's personality is given to the world in the form of holiness and love. In an infinitely higher degree, all this is true of God. Creation is merely His picture. It is in knowledge of Himself that true knowledge consists. We know God best when we know Him in His holiness and wisdom and love, apart from His creation. Only Moses had to some extent this vision. Yet it is the business of all to try to reach this stage. Knowledge of Hashem Himself is the only true way to know Him. But how can we know Him intimately? Well, according to Levertoff, we can know Hashem best when we know Him through His holiness and His wisdom. Both His holiness and His wisdom are found in the Torah. But it's difficult to have a relationship with a book. The Messiah is the personification of Hashem's wisdom. Paul states that in the Messiah are hidden all treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And this is further stated in 1 Corinthians when he says, but by His doing, you are in Messiah Yeshua, who became to us wisdom from God. Therefore, we may know Hashem best through His Son. Attaining a vision of God is a goal worthwhile for everyone. Moses states that you will seek the Lord your God and you will find Him if you search for Him with all your heart and all your soul. The prophet Jeremiah says, you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. And in another passage, he says, let not the wise man boast of his wisdom. Let not the mighty man boast of his might. Let not a rich man boast of his riches. But let him who boasts boast of this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who exercises loving kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. For I delight in these things, declares the Lord.